Howdy, this is Mr. Justice. Today we're going to go over our draw notes from last time. Let me pull those up. And I'd like us to answer this question. So what I'd like you to do is push pause and on this video, make sure that you can see this prompt and then take a moment to respond to it. Compare anaerobic and aerobic respiration in terms of location, energy molecules, steps, products, and reactants. All right, we're back. You should have by now completed a paragraph response to the prompt that you see on the screen. So let's go over what your answer might have looked like. All right, let me pull up my other camera here. And so what I'd like us to do is create a page of notes. You can take a moment and push pause. This is what our page of notes is going to look like by the end of the process. I'm going to go through, though, each component of this so that you have a better understanding of the differences between anaerobic and aerobic respiration. So create a 3-columned graphic organizer. This is a comparison table that we'll use to compare anaerobic on the left and aerobic respiration on the right. And what I'd like to do in the middle column is write differences in regard to. And the very first difference in regard to, how about steps involved? Anaerobic respiration involves glycolysis. This is the splitting of glucose. And if oxygen is not present, then the products of glycolysis, pyruvate, will move on into fermentation. There's 2 different types of fermentation here that we talked about in our class. Alcohol fermentation is performed by yeast, and lactic acid fermentation performed by bacteria, animal cells, and human muscle cells. So those are the steps involved with anaerobic respiration. Take a look at the steps involved with aerobic respiration. The Krebs cycle. This is, well, if oxygen is present, we split glucose into 2 pyruvates, and those pyruvates are modified into acetyl-CoA, which enter into the Krebs cycle. Those electrons are eventually stripped off, fully oxidizing those organic compounds, and then those electrons are held by NADH and FADH2. Those electrons move into electron transport chain, and poof, we'll be able to make a lot of ATP. This process is called oxidative phosphorylation, and ATP synthase is the protein responsible for producing that ATP. All right, so here's another difference in regard to, how about location? The location of anaerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, whereas aerobic respiration requires a mitochondria. It happens there. In fact, there's some additional information. Krebs cycle happens in what's called the matrix of the mitochondria on the very interior area of it. Electron transport chain and ATP synthase, these proteins can be found in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Another difference in regard to, how about the energy molecules produced? Anaerobic respiration does not oxidize glucose as efficiently as aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration takes 2 ATP, initial investment of 2 ATP molecules to make 4 ATP. Since we made since it took 2 ATP to make 4, we say that it nets 2 ATP molecules. A couple NADH molecules too are produced during this process compared to the amount of ATP energy produced during aerobic respiration. If oxygen's present, then as we fully oxidize glucose, we'll make upwards of 36 ATP. We'll make some NADH and some FADH2 energy molecules as well. These energy molecules hold those electrons. They pass those electrons to the electron transport chain proteins in the process of making lots of ATP. Another difference in regard to, how about oxygen gas required? Oxygen gas is not required for anaerobic respiration, whereas it is for aerobic respiration. Take a look, right? Hey, human muscle cells undergo glycolysis and fermentation, right? Think about this for a moment. As you guys are exercising, maybe you're running, you need ATP in order to be able to contract your muscles and move, right? And so sometimes, though, when we're exercising, we don't get, our muscle cells don't get enough of that oxygen gas in order to make glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, and ATP synthase move forward. So Instead, though, our muscles, they still need ATP, and so we have this different biochemical pathway, fermentation, lactic acid fermentation. When oxygen's not present, our muscle cells will still make a little bit of ATP so that it can continue to do, the muscles can continue to do their job. But if in the meantime, though, when this process happens, we start to get lactic acid buildup in our muscle cells. You can actually feel that lactic acid buildup in our muscle cells as that pain associated with really physically exerting ourselves. If you want that lactic acids to stop, if you want lactic acid fermentation to stop, all you need to do is slow down and then breathe a couple breaths. And once you start getting oxygen back into those muscle cells, we'll be able to fully make 34 to 36 ATP during this process and really utilize a lot more of that potential energy found in glucose in the foods that we eat. What else? Another difference in regard to the reactants involved. These are the ingredients required. Anaerobic respiration starts off with glucose. Glycolysis splits glucose into two pyruvates. And if oxygen gas is present, then those pyruvates broken down during glycolysis will be further broken down during aerobic respiration, if that makes sense. And then finally, the difference in regard to products here is, well, let's see. If oxygen's not present, that glucose will be broken into pyruvate. That process happens during glycolysis. And then again, if there's no oxygen present, it depends on the species of organism we are, but either alcohol fermentation or lactic acid fermentation will take place. In terms of alcohol fermentation, alcohol and carbon dioxide are produced. And in terms of lactic acid fermentation, lactic acid is produced. Those are the products associated with anaerobic respiration. And then if we do have oxygen present and we're able to fully oxidize glucose in the presence of O2 gas, then we'll produce carbon dioxide and water. That was the differences in regard to all of these different characteristics here for anaerobic and aerobic respiration. I'm Mr. Justice. Let me know if you have any questions.